Too loud? Is that better? Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Spencer Heywood. I'm a security analyst with the Utah Education Network. My Twitter handle is @_bin_sh. The slides that I have presenting here today will be, I shared them on my Twitter feed, so if you want to just check it out, I don't care if you follow me or whatever, just feel free to grab the slides and look at it whenever you need to. My other handle is HeywoodLH. If you are in the Utah Saint Slack channel, you'll see me in there. I'm pretty active in there, and yeah, so I guess now that it's 11 o'clock, I can get started. So today I'm going to be talking about port scanning, and I know that a lot of people here at SAINTCON will know how to do port scanning. They'll know what port scanning is. They know what ports are, but I think there's also a lot of misunderstanding behind it, and I think port scanning is also widely underused. And so I'm going to present some tools not only for a newbie, but also for more experienced security admins or network admins and so on, that hopefully you'll be able to take away from this talk today. But yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand during my presentation, and I'd love to answer them. Otherwise, I will leave a section open at the end for questions, so if you want to wait for then, that's fine. But yeah, so let's get started. So first, we'll go into what a port is. So when I was trying to define this, it's kind of difficult, especially if you're trying to my mom would ask me what this presentation was about that I'm giving, and trying to even describe what a port is a little bit difficult. But Wikipedia has a pretty good article on it. If you check that link out, it has more information. But a port is a number representing a virtual interface that enables software to interact with services running on a single computer. Due to the limitations of networking, the possible port ranges that we have are ports numbers 0 through 65535. Can't go any higher than that. Well-known port numbers that systems often use for widely used services are ports 0 through 1024. Often your most interesting port scans will be in those port ranges. But you can often change services to run on different ports, so they are not limited to ports 0 through 1024. Services running on specific ports often broadcast banners that provide information about the services. So if you do a port scan and you're able to snatch banners, you can often identify really interesting information about your targets. So here's some common ports. You should be familiar with a lot of them. So 21 FTP, 22 SSH. Ones that we all use on a daily basis are port 80 and port 443, both for HTTP and HTTPS. But you can check this list out. These are some interesting ports that you'd want to scan if you're doing a port scan, especially during an audit, or if you're just trying to inventory what's on your systems. So talking more about banners, I went into it a little bit, but banners advertise relevant information about network accessible services on a computer. This is also from a Wikipedia article about banner grabbing. Administrators can use banners to take inventory of the systems and services on their network. However, an intruder can use banners to find network hosts that are running versions of applications and operating systems with known exploits. So if you do port scanning correctly, using banners, you can identify versions of systems that are running, and you can correlate those with known exploits, and therefore run those exploits on those systems and get into the system. So here's an example of a banner I grabbed. I blurred out the host names, but I just used Telnet to grab the banner. So I telnetted into this host using port 80, and you can see here what the output looks like, and then you see the command that I ran under escape character is control and then that bracket. You see the command I ran, which was get/html1.1. That get command is just meaning I'm trying to grab the root directory of the web server using HTML version 1.1. And then you see the response that came back. And to dissect that response a little bit, you get all sorts of really interesting information. So you can see One, the version, you see 200 on there, that's the response code. So that means that my connection was successful, and you see OK, meaning that the connection was OK. You see the date that I did the connection. You see what kind of server is running. So this is an Ubuntu server running Apache 2.4.18. So just that information alone, that server portion, if we found some vulnerabilities specific to Apache version 2.4.18, you could use that easily against this server. I believe at the time that I did it, I had patched this machine, or I might have just scanned a random host, I don't really remember. But obviously, as you can see, there's lots of information that you can grab from these banners. So who does port scanning? Like, why would anyone care? There's a lot of different entities that do port scanning, and we'll go over a couple of them. So Shodan is a great service. I'm going to be talking a little more about them later in the presentation and how to use them. But Shodan is a service where you can go online and see what kind of ports have been scanned on different servers. So let's say you want to check out your home IP address and what's been scanned on it. You could type in your home IP address in Shodan, and it would return results if it had been scanned before. If it hadn't been scanned, the results will come back with nothing, or if you're not running anything interesting, it might not have any useful information. SAINCON is another service similar to Shodan. Same with Census, Zoomeye, Rapid7. And then, of course, you know, postulating here, there's probably three-letter agencies doing it. You know, they're probably trying to find all sorts of interesting stuff on the internet for whatever reasons. And then most importantly, hackers are trying to do port scanning. So if you've ever set up a server and you just watch, so let's say you set up a server on the internet that's completely accessible, almost immediately once it's set up, if it's publicly facing, it will immediately start getting scans. Hackers are just always doing automated scans, and they somehow automate the harvesting of those results, and they automate attacks on those. But this is really important because do you know what hackers see on your network? Like, have you done a port scan of your network and see what they see? Because if you don't know what you're advertising, you don't know what your attack surface is. Obviously, there's lots of different attack surfaces that someone could take, but this is a pretty significant one because if you don't know what you're advertising and someone connects to it and it's a vulnerable machine, they could completely exploit your system remotely. That's why port scanning is so important, is because it's a completely remote attack that you can do. Someone in India, if you have a vulnerable server that's completely accessible to the web, someone in India could hack it, get into it, and boom, your network is pwned. And so that's why this is important. You got to know what you're advertising. So what are the benefits of port scanning? So the first, like that Wikipedia article says, inventorying devices and network accessible services is really important. Even if you don't use it for security, it's really helpful to inventory what devices are broadcasting what. You can use that for troubleshooting servers. You can use that for all sorts of things. Inventory is so important. The second thing that I found interesting once I started doing port scanning on a massive scale is that you can identify misconfigured network and firewall rules. So for example, at my job, we do a port scan of our network, and we've seen multiple hosts running port 389 completely accessible externally. Port 389 is an LDAP port, and LDAP is commonly used for services like Active Directory. That's what Active Directory is. It's an LDAP service. And so if that's accessible externally, someone may be able to potentially remotely exploit your Active Directory server and start collecting information on users, passwords, and so on. And then most importantly, I think for security professionals, is identifying vulnerable devices and services. Through banners like I showed earlier, if you find a version or version of a server that's vulnerable, you can easily use port scanning to do recon on what services are vulnerable. And then again, just to emphasize, you can always use more inventory in your network. Inventory is so important. You need to establish what's normal and what's irregular. And you also need to establish what shouldn't be externally exposed and what should be. So now we're going to go into some useful tools. All of these are open source, and so if you wanted to, you could download all of these tools and start using them today. These are really, really incredible tools that security professionals use everywhere. Just going over some of them. So the ones I'm going to go over today are going to be Netcat, Telnet, Nmap, Masscan, and Shodan. Some others that a coworker recommended that I look at are these others: Unicorn Scan, 1-2 Punch, Flash, Scan Cannon. They're all really awesome. I would recommend you check them out because they're really sweet tools for automating a lot of this scanning and also exploiting the results that are found. So I would definitely check those other ones out, although I'm going to be hitting more of the basics. So first we're going to go into Shodan. So Shodan is a port scanning search engine. So like I said earlier, let's say you wanted to see what results Shodan has indexed on your IP address. You could go to shodan.io, type in your IP address, and see all of the ports that are externally exposed. So there's 3 different ways to explore Shodan search results. So the first one is through the web interface, which I would recommend. The second is through their command line, and their command line tool is very well documented. John Matherly, the creator of Shodan, he releases little snippets of videos I think every week to show how to use Shodan's command line more effectively. So I would definitely recommend using their command line as well. And then they also have an API in which you could write your own tools to interact with it. If you're a developer, I would definitely recommend doing that. You could easily build some security integrations using their API. It's a really awesome tool. So first we'll go into Shodan's web interface. So Shodan provides an easy-to-use web interface for retrieving Shodan search results. Similar to Google, Shodan has dorks that can be used to return more specific search results. That link, if you find this slide, I'll actually show you what it looks like. But this link is a Twitter post with a whole bunch of helpful Shodan dorks. You can't really see, but in the image, there's the search results, or the search that they've done and the results that have come back. So I would definitely recommend checking out this Twitter post because it's really helpful for knowing what dorks to use and what examples. And then some example searches that I've done, you can see here. So this dork I'm using is org Comcast cable, and then I'm scanning port 80. So any Shodan result that has come over an IP of Comcast cable with port 80 externally exposed will be available in the search result. Shodan has some nice features where you can export all of these results into a PDF or a CSV, and then you can start chopping the results up as you need to. Another one is city, Salt Lake City, country US. These Shodan dorks are really helpful they're really helpful for narrowing down your searches. So if you're a large ISP like where I work, it's really helpful to be able to use these Shodan dorks to see what other people are looking at. Because most likely, if the results are publicly accessible on Shodan, a hacker's found it and they're trying to exploit your system. They're probably trying to do something malicious on it. So I would definitely recommend, if you haven't checked out Shodan, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's probably the most popular online port scanning service that's available right now. I would definitely recommend checking it out and see what other people are looking at on your network. So here's some examples with their CLI tool. So it's written in Python. So if you have pip installed, you can just use pip3 install Shodan. Well, I prefer Python 3, so you could just use pip install Shodan if you want to do the Python 2 version. And then some other useful examples. In order to use Shodan's command line, you have to have an API, which if you sign up with a free account, you can get a free API. Education gets a large discount on the features that are available. And then there's some other helpful Shodan command line tools. Again, John Matherly releases helpful hints on how to use Shodan, so I would recommend checking that out as well. One thing on the last section that I would recommend doing is you can create alerts in Shodan. So when an IP address in a specific subnet shows up in Shodan, you can have an alert generated and sent to you, which is only accessible via the command line. So you have to, if you want to create an alert, you have to use the command line tool. But I would recommend creating alerts. One of the first things that I did at my previous job was creating alerts in Shodan, so that way if some funky results came up, I'd know about it immediately. And again, because hackers are going to be looking at this as well, you're going to want to know if something in your IP space comes up. So now we're going to go over some funny examples that I've seen on Shodan. So this first one is, you can't really tell, sorry about the resolution, but what I did is I searched for hacked. That's all I searched for in Shodan. I just looked for hacked. And then it returned a whole bunch of machines with banners containing the word hacked in it. So a great example, the first one is, the host name is hacked router help SOS default password. The second one is hacked FTP server. The third one is hacked router SOS was MF worm infected. The last one is hacked router help SOS had dupe password. So there's all sorts of funny things that you can find on the web, and what I really like about Shodan is that there's all sorts of interesting things that no one has ever looked for. There's all sorts of combinations of dorks that you can use, and using those dorks, you can really find some weird stuff out there on the internet. So this was a good one. I just did a search for a camera, a specific type of camera. I blurred it out though. But if you look here, this guy's living room is completely accessible to the internet, and it's like super creepy. I went to the link as well, and it's totally live. This person's living room is just totally open to the internet, which, like, totally awesome. I was super happy about this when I saw that. I was like, man, like, this guy's living room is on fire. And then this last one was the funniest one I found. So I actually didn't find it. I was following someone on Twitter, and they posted this, and I was like, this is amazing. So if you don't know what this is a hardware device that contains two-factor authentication keys. And what this person did, so one of the big reasons behind two-factor authentication is that you log in and you log in using your password, and then a random code is generated that, you know, would be pretty hard to guess. Even if it's six characters, it times out after 30 seconds, typically. So after 30 seconds, that 6-digit code is completely useless. If you found out this person's username and password, there's their second factor authentication key. It's completely accessible to the web. I thought it was really awesome. I was like, man, this is effective two-factor authentication right here. So yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff that people put on the internet. Even if you don't want to do it for security reasons, if you want to just lurk, like, Shodan's a great place for that. It's awesome. All right, so now we're going to get into some more command line based tools. They're pretty simple. Again, a lot of you will know how to use them and what they're used for, as well as their syntax. I'm just going to go into them on a pretty surface level for port scanning. So the first one is Netcat. So if you look here, Netcat on certain systems, the full command is sometimes Netcat, sometimes it's just NC. It's available on I think all Unix systems come with it by default. But if not, on Ubuntu, you could just do like sudo apt-get install netcat, and so on. But if you look here, I did a netcat on one of my home servers on port 1024. And as you can see, so netcat, and then the IP address, and then the port number that you're trying to scan. And the output, as you see, is SSH 2.0 open SSH 7.2 P2 Ubuntu for Ubuntu 2.4. So you know it's an Ubuntu server running OpenSSH on port 1024. Really useful information. And then I did the same thing with Telnet. I prefer, when it comes to scripting stuff, I prefer Netcat because as you can see here in Netcat's man page, it says, unlike Telnet, Netcat scripts nicely and separates error messages onto standard error instead of sending them to standard output as Telnet does with some. So if you use Netcat, it's a lot more scriptable. So I would definitely recommend just using that if you haven't used either of these two. Out of habit, I just use Telnet. So as you can see, I telnetted to that same host on that port as well, and it came up with the same output. Telnet is no longer pre-installed on Mac OS, just so you know. It's actually not pre-installed on a lot anymore, just because Telnet was a unencrypted protocol. So Nmap is a really awesome tool. Again, a lot of people here at SAINTCON will already know how to use Nmap, but it's a really cool tool. There's all sorts of really interesting functionality that Nmap has. For example, there's vulnerability scanner plugins. There's all sorts of different plugins that you can use for it, but I'm just going to go over the basics. So the first is man Nmap. That's how you look at the man page. I would definitely recommend checking that out. The second is Nmap -lowercase s uppercase p, and then the IP range that I want to do a sweep on. So S is scan, P is for ping. So I'll do a ping sweep on this /24 in this example. And then another one is you can use Nmap to detect operating systems. So what Nmap does is it connects to a host, then the host responds with specific information. Nmap will use that information oftentimes to fingerprint the host. Typically on more well-known systems like Windows, Linux, Mac, typically Nmap will come back with pretty accurate results, but sometimes depending on how you have your network configured as well as depending on the device, sometimes it'll come back with inaccurate results. But overall, it's still really useful to use that flag. This next command is Nmap lowercase s capital S, and this does a silent scan. So it does a TCP connection test on all default ports. There's a -p flag that you can pass to Nmap to scan more than just 0 through 1024, I believe are the default ports. But if you do this silent scan, it'll come back with all of the ports on 0 through 1024. It'll come back with what they're running, if they're open, or if they're filtered. That means that it's probably firewalled off. And then on this last example, just that same command but we're doing a port scan on that single host, doing ports 0 through 65535. So every possible port will respond in this command. There's also some really nice flags for Nmap to increase speed as well as like lower speeds. So that way, you'll want to use lower speeds if you want to be, more quiet on a network. Whereas if you don't really care, you can do capital T5. 5 is the fastest speed, and it'll run all the scans that you've told it to. But yeah, so those are some of the commands, some useful commands that I use on a pretty regular basis with Nmap. So here's an example of Nmap. So I just did the scan on all the ports, all the default ports. So if you look here, this is a Linux server that I set up specifically for this. So port 22 is SSH. You see that the state is closed. Port 443, which is HTTPS, is open. Port 514 is open. Port 1024, which I'm running SSH on in this example, is open, but it inaccurately identified the service, but still it's useful to know what is open. And then 6789 and 8181 are some other services that I was running as well. But you can see Nmap comes back with a lot of really useful results in port scanning to identify what kind of systems are you're targeting. So I like Masscan. So Masscan is similar to Nmap in a lot of ways, but I like Masscan for, this is just a personal preference, but I like Masscan for huge swaths of IP address ranges. One thing that I would recommend is if you install Masscan, especially on Linux, build it from source, because the repositories don't have updated versions of Masscan, and Masscan has had some nice new features come out. And it's really not that hard to build. If you just check out the Masscan README by Robert David Graham on GitHub, if you check that out, he has the build instructions in the README, and it's pretty straightforward to build. But you see here, I have a basic usage. So you look here, we have the Masscan command invoked, and then -p with the port ranges that I want to target. And then after that, the IP addresses /ranges that I want to target. The syntax by default is pretty simple, but it can get really complex. And Masscan has some really cool features, so I would definitely recommend checking out the man page, or actually the help page for Masscan, because it doesn't have a man page currently. But yeah, I would definitely recommend using that tool for mass scanning large ranges of IP addresses. According to the README, like it says here, this is the fastest internet port scanner. It can scan the entire internet in under 6 minutes, transmitting 10 million packets per second. So it's really fast. It's an awesome, really well-developed tool. So here's an example of what I used Masscan for. So we invoked Masscan, and we're doing ports 0 through 1024, and we're scanning a 192.168.1.0/24 range. And then you can specify the rate in which you want Masscan to run at. So if you don't have a really big network or a really robust network, I've seen Masscan when I run Masscan on my home network, it just totally makes everything super slow. So just be aware of that. If you do a faster rate, it might slow down your bandwidth if you don't have a really robust network. And then I just specified the interface that I'm using on that specific Linux server. But yeah, again, I would recommend checking out the GitHub repo because the README has a lot of useful information. So Port Crawler is a tool that I wrote that is a wrapper around Masscan. And essentially what this Port Crawler script does is it creates almost like a self-hosted Shodan instance. So if you have a server that you can spare for port scanning, this would be a really great time to use it. And the project that I made, you can see the URL there. It's github.com/heywoodlh/port-crawler-pi, all capitalized. I would recommend checking it out. I have a simple install script. It installs Elasticsearch, Kibana, and Masscan for you. Currently, the install script is limited to Ubuntu and CentOS. So if you want another distribution or operating system supported, please just open a GitHub issue request and then just tell me what you need, and I'll try to get it ready. But I'll go over some examples. So if you want to check it out, I have a demo set up. The URL is https scanner.heywoody.me, port 9000, and it's got a username and password, and you can see it here. So the username is PC2018admin, PC uppercase, A and admin uppercase, and the password is port crawler. P and C and port crawler are capitalized, port crawler 2018. And then the hosting costs were provided by Graywell Design, so I'd recommend checking them out. They're a great web hosting, web design firm. But I'll show you a little demo of what it looks like. But this is an example of a project you could set up in your internal network to start doing inventorying / port scanning on a really large scale. So this is an example I have set up. So you see here, there's all sorts of really useful information. Sorry that the fields are a little small. Let me see if I can. So you can see here, in this dashboard that I have set up, you can see all the different ports that are running. So the hosts that I'm scanning are 3 honeypots that I set up. So if you want to scan these IP addresses, I don't really care. I'm going to destroy them in a few days anyway. But you can see this Kibana dashboard really makes it super easy for me to parse through the results. So let's say, we can look down here. We can see all the different IP addresses that we're scanning. And so let's say we want to filter by this one IP address. We can filter for this value. And boom, we can see all the specific results for it. Here we have a daily histogram. If we go to this last day, which I think was, I think I have it scanning at 1 in the morning every day. So this will be today's results. If we hit on that, it filters it even further down to the results that it picked up per day. This day. And so this is a really useful tool. So I work at an ISP and we have millions of IP addresses. And so using this, we can find all sorts of really interesting information on what's on our network. More importantly, I think, again, for inventory's sake, it's really important for you to know if an attacker were scanning you externally or internally, what they would see. So yeah, feel free to check out the GitHub repo that I have posted. If you need help getting it set up, feel free to open up an issue or talk to me on Utah Saint, or just talk to me after this presentation. I don't really care. I'm fairly approachable. But I'm out of time, so I'm not going to be going out for any questions, but thank you so much for coming, and hopefully you were able to learn something useful from this. Thank you.